And welcome to the private well water quality presentation. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. I will be presenting tonight with Lou Baronelli, who's the Water Lab Program Manager. And he stepped out for a minute, but he'll be back here shortly. Working with the Department of Environmental Services, I've encountered many very proactive people, and this is a service that we provide without any compensation because we really believe in our mission of making sure that New Hampshire residents have potable, healthy water to drink. I'm going to get started. Before I do, I just want to point out that some of the folks I work with have teamed up with Dartmouth to research arsenic effects on human health and the distribution of arsenic in water throughout New Hampshire. And this is a collaboration between the Division of Public Health Services with the Public Health Lab and the Department of Environmental Services. It's essentially a prefab presentation that I've tweaked a little bit to make it unique to Northwood. But if you would like to give this presentation to any individual groups about private well water quality, there are materials available for you to do that as well as this presentation. We will first cover private wells in New Hampshire, then contaminants that are often present in private well water quality. Then we will go on to describing the various analytes that are recommended for private wells, as well as the sampling containers and holding times. When you get analytical results, you'll be curious about what treatments you might need, and we'll talk about how you can find out which treatments you'll need. And then finally, to touch on it again, if you wish to engage any of your individual communities, the materials are there for you to do that. And we'll talk about those just a tad. Private wells in New Hampshire. There are a variety of wells. As you see, on the left is a dug well. On the right is a drilled well. There are also spring casements. Private wells serve as a primary source of drinking water for approximately 43% of the population of New Hampshire. On the left is a GIS image of private well locations, and on the right is an image of public well locations. I should say it's about 46% of New Hampshire's population, and that equates to a little over 500,000 people. However, no uniform testing for private wells is required in New Hampshire. There are no treatment requirements for private well water. Owners can drink mud if they want to, and there is no regulation to stop them from doing that. In New Hampshire, we're very fortunate to have abundant groundwater. It's generally free from anthropological contaminants, although they are there in some locations. The EPA regulates public water systems, but it does not have the authority to regulate private drinking water. About 15% of Americans overall, compared to 46% of New Hampshireites, rely on their own private drinking water supplies. And those supplies, as I just mentioned, are not subject to EPA standards. Though some states and local governments do set rules to protect users of these wells. In New Hampshire, about 7 towns require private well testing. Northwood is not one of those towns, but These towns require testing to receive a certificate of occupancy. They cite the public health authority that gives them the authority to require a law, an ordinance I should say, to test for water, oftentimes when a property is exchanging hands. They refer to the DES standard analysis, which has been advertised and which is out there in the hallway for the containers and the list, and you can also easily find that just by Googling private well water quality New Hampshire. The DHHS lab webpage has a document listed there that you can access as well. Most of these towns require the water quality testing without treatment versus with treatment. So they want to know what the raw water quality is, because treatment devices can be kept up poorly or they can be kept up well, and they want to know what's coming into the house. By defining the word potable to make water quality testing uniform across all towns could change whether it's the Wild West here in New Hampshire. What is in your water? The contaminants can be either naturally occurring or man-made. There's a very wide distribution of old underground storage tanks that are being closed across New Hampshire, and where there's a gas station, there's a possibility to have gasoline components in water nearby the gas station. This image shows the probability of arsenic being in groundwater in New Hampshire. It's an example of a naturally occurring contaminant, and with the deeper colors, you have a higher percentage of the likelihood for arsenic to be in your water. I've outlined Northwood right here. As you see, it generally just has a 20 to 30% chance of arsenic being in your water. What is this based on? This is based on the geology. So what kind of chemical makeup does the bedrock have that it would supply arsenic to groundwater? And I don't think you can see this particularly well. I'll play with the focus just a tad. It's easier farther back. But this is just a little slice of the geology of New Hampshire here, and these are various geological units in Northwood. You have Littleton Formation, you have the Concord Granite, a tunnelite. Granite can grade to something that has a little less silica in it called tunnelite, and the Perry Mountain Formation. So those all occur right in here. And if you look at the explanation, the group geological unit showing percentage of metals with concentrations of arsenic greater than 0.01 milligrams per liter is in the 20 to 30 range, and that's why we get that there.
Is this online, please? Do you know?
This specific information is from the USGS. You can just look arsenic New Hampshire, USGS.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Human caused contaminants. Has anybody not heard of perfluorinated compounds in this room? Okay. Firefighting foams, Teflon. We all know that this is a state of developing information right now. And so I'll just say that they exist. They're a problem right now. There's a health advisory level of 70 nanograms per liter in New Hampshire, but we have maximum contaminant levels that have been proposed, and they're holding public hearings about it. There was one today, and there's going to be another one next Tuesday at the New Hampshire DESP's field office. And rather than attending, you can also submit written comments. So just go to NHDES and PFAS, and you'll get a lot of history and current developments.
I was today. I read in the Union Leader about these hearings because it said a hearing was held in Merrimack, another hearing was being held today. I read that this morning in Concord and one next week.
Right.
The Union Leader gave no hint of where these were. So my wife actually looked that up, and she looked at the MUR report on that, and they gave no hint of where these were. So I went to the New Hampshire DES website, and I looked for it, and I searched. For example, in events, it was not. None of these are listed in events, and I couldn't find them anywhere else. I did searches like hearings, PFAS. Couldn't come up with anything on the New Hampshire DES website. Finally, I kept searching, and I found that New Hampshire Public Radio actually gave the location and times.
That's really interesting because I got that information when I Googled NHDES because it's the fastest way. NHDES and I think it was PFAS.
So it must be somewhere on the website.
Yes, but I will talk to our media person to talk about getting those on the greater calendar. Yes, Lou?
No, I'm
Oh, okay. It's
you.
dangerous to scratch your head, right?
It's very frustrating to have this sort of thing.
That would be very frustrating.
Yes. Thank you.
But
Well, I
you
will
did a
talk
good job.
Yes.
Oh,
From the information.
I don't know. I guess I lucked
I'll
out.
speak a little bit on that from GIS data. The GIS locations of public water supply wells are generally considered important classified information in terms of the public because of homeland security risks or contamination,
That's correct.
man-made contamination or purposeful contamination. So they might be purposely hiding some of the locations.
Of the hearings?
No.
The public hearings? I'm talking about the public hearings, so.
I thought you were talking about the well.
Well, that was my previous question.
Both important things.
Okay. Another human-caused contaminant is petroleum compounds. Other human-caused contaminants include petroleum compounds, MTBE. You might have heard of the MTBE settlement with Exxon. That's helped the DES fund more investigation into the presence of MTBE across the state. We're remediating contamination sites where private wells might be contaminated, done extra testing around known locations. There are some water wells that are at high risk for MTBE, and the MTBE Bureau has been proactive in searching those out. Northwood does have ether contaminated properties from what I've looked at from a cursory review, and you can look at it yourself by going to DES One Stop and choosing remediation sites, and beneath that, ether contaminated sites. What I've seen so far is that the wells have treatment systems on them for private wells, or they have water supplied to them. 30% of samples in the USGS Seacoast study above MCLs for naturally occurring metals or lead. Lead is typically imparted to water by either household plumbing or municipal plumbing. There are parts of municipal plumbing, even if all the old lead pipe is gone, that are called goosenecks that connect the water headers, the water mains, to service connections, which are the household or offices and other types of connections to large public water systems. Not all of them have them. Sometimes there's a mix. Sometimes there are none. What are the common contaminants in New Hampshire wells? I would like to say that bacteria is most widely present in wells. From data that I've seen with the EPA across the nation and New Hampshire, bacteria have the most. They no longer have violations for bacteria, but there's something called assessments where public water systems have to be assessed if there's a detection of bacteria. And there are more bacteria assessments than there are maximum contaminant level violations for all the other types of contaminants that have been detected. What's particularly important, aside from E. coli, one type of bacteria, is arsenic. We have this 10 micrograms per liter, also called 10 parts per billion level, that 20% of private well samples are above the health standard. If you remember the image that I just showed you is 20 to 30% in Northwood, based on just a few samples. In fact, I want to show you one thing before I go on, so just bear with me a minute. So we have one color for Northwood, and we have basically one color here for the type of geological formation. Actually, two, you can see a little stripe there. There are a few more, but there are few. But if you look at these little symbols, these denote the concentrations of arsenic within that formation. So you see that even one formation has a variety of arsenic levels in it. So you can't just say, oh, I'm in this type of rock, there is no problem. It varies even within the geologic formation. Other contaminants are lead stagnant, lead flushed. Stagnant is your first sample in the morning after your water sat in your pipes that have the lead solder, maybe, and lead pipe, maybe. And that would be to be expected to be your most contaminated sample. And then we have lead flushed to find out what just might be in the source. So what's really associated with your pipes and what isn't. Nitrate, there's a 10 milligram per liter concentration limit because above 10, infants can get the blue baby syndrome because it prevents them from using their oxygen correctly. Then we have radon. Radon doesn't have an EPA level anymore. It used to. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But you can see that radon is dramatically present in Northwood, in New Hampshire water. So it's something that you will want to take a look at in your own water. Manganese is in 40% of the private well samples above the health hazard, and manganese has neurological effects, so it's important to take a look at as well. The health impacts of arsenic include cancer, bladder, lung, kidney, liver, prostate, cardiovascular disease, reproductive and developmental effects, cognitive and neurological effects, diabetes, other metabolic disorders, and neuropathy. Now, these are all listed, and it's true, and that's based on a 0.010 milligrams per liter level. However, arsenic is so prevalent, and it therefore would cost a lot more to get to lower concentrations, so there'd be a lot more widespread treatment if you treated to below the 0.010. However, New Hampshire is currently looking at doing that because the way that these maximum contaminant levels are determined by the EPA is a level that gives between 1 to 100 chances in 1 million over the course of a lifetime of drinking water that there will be a risk of a health hazard to you. For arsenic, at 0.010 milligrams per liter. It's about 1 in 3,000. And it's because of the cost of treating it to a lower level. Radon health impacts are estimated to be responsible for 21,000 lung cancer deaths a year in the United States. And that equates to about 100 deaths a year in New Hampshire. Most of the risk from radon in water comes from breathing the radon gas that comes out of your faucets. Taking a shower in radon-contaminated water would really maximize the inhalation of radon gas from your water. As you can see in the graph to the right, it's more dangerous than drunk driving. This is an old chart based on the EPA's old radon website before it was taken down, but it still gives you an idea of risks. These are radon zones by county. These are where, here's New Hampshire. It's in this area that the predicted average indoor radon screening levels are greater than 4 picocuries per liter. And Northwood is in zone 2 with the predicted average indoor radon screening levels from 2 to 4 picocuries per liter. Concentration of 10,000 picocuries per liter in your water is thought to generate about 1 picocurie per liter, I said per liter, in air. And this is another distribution map for radon concentrations in New Hampshire. As you'll see, we have a 20 to almost 30% chance of having radon above 4 picocuries per liter in Northwood in indoor air, not in water, but in indoor air. The health effects for common well water contaminants. For bacteria, E. coli can cause vomiting, diarrhea, stomach cramps, nausea, and fever. Babies, young children, and adults with compromised immune systems are most vulnerable to getting sick by E. coli. Lead is very dangerous because lead substitutes for calcium in a person's body, in the bones, and in the brain, and it never gets replaced. Once it's there, it stays. So I would encourage you all, not only in listening to this today, but go home and Google "get the lead out," because lead was a rampant contaminant or component, I would say, in paint, especially for old homes. If it's painted over, there are areas in old homes, casement windows where they go up and down and produce dust, where the new paint can get worn away, that can produce dust. That's mineral that can, anybody puts it in their mouth, children, it's very dangerous. So please Google "get the lead out." It manifests as anger and learning issues, including other aspects, as you can read, are slowed body growth, kidney problems, hearing problems, seizures, brain damage, lower IQ level, trouble learning, reduced attention spans, so your AD spans, behavior problems. Pregnant women their unborn babies can be damaged through ingestion by pregnant women. Adults themselves are at higher risk for cancer, stroke, high blood pressure, and could develop nervous system problems, kidney problems, anemia, and decreased sperm count in men. Copper can cause vomiting, diarrhea, stomach cramps, nausea. Children under 1 year old have the highest risk of getting sick. Where does copper come from? It comes from corrosion in your household pipes. What causes corrosion? Low pH, salt. I mentioned the methemoglobinemia, or the blue baby syndrome for nitrate. People with chronic health problems such as heart or lung disease or enzyme deficiencies might be at higher risk for elevated nitrate. And then what if some of these, what if you have more than one problem? Think about how those can be compounded in your health. We mentioned MTBE. The EPA has not set a health-based drinking water standard, but the DES has adopted a drinking water standard for public water supplies for 13 micrograms per liter. The DES is really a leader in the country for some of its work.
Excuse me?
Yes.
MTBE is obviously a bad chemical to be ingesting. The reason it's in our water supply is because the federal, whatever, water level department at the federal level insisted getting lead, which is bad, out of the gasoline.
That's correct.
And the gas companies complied, and they put in MTBE, which the federal government said was just fine.
That's true.
As a substitute for lead. And then later on, the federal government said, oops, it's not fine. And not only that, but they're suing the gasoline companies, and the state is suing the gasoline companies for this substance that they said was just fine for them to put in it. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
That you believe that that is accurate, what I just
I think
said?
it's accurate, yes.
Thank you.
I absolutely think it's accurate.
Thank you.
I was involved in some research for the case against some of the other companies. So I have a little background in it. An increase in liver and kidney cancer was found in rats and mice breathing high levels of MTBE. Testing. We're going to talk now about how to test your water, what to test it for. Thank you, Lou.
Thank you, Shelley. Just let me reiterate something that Shelley mentioned earlier. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and inviting us here to talk to you about private well testing. Just for a little bit of background, I just want to mention how this presentation and how our outreach efforts came about. Several years ago, the Department of Environmental Services, along with the Public Health, received a grant from CDC to look at the issue of private well testing and why people choose to test their private wells or not. If they do test their private wells, why they choose to treat or not. And so we did a lot of research on that, had some focus groups, did some surveys, outreach, and we determined that, private well testing, there are basically a few barriers that people come up against when they try to decide whether or not they're going to test their private well. One of them is they don't know that they should do it, or the water tastes fine, so I don't need to do it. It's too hard, costs too much. So this presentation and these outreach efforts that we've been doing for the past 5 years or so, basically to knock down some of those barriers. We're here to educate you, inform you of the reasons why it's important to test your private wells, and we're trying to make it easy for you to do it. I hear it all the time. I picked up the kit, and the next time I go to Concord, I'll test my water. And it just sits on the kitchen counter for months or whatever. So we're trying to break down some of these barriers to help people test their private wells. And then we also have tools that we'll talk about in a little bit that help people understand when they get their lab report. A lot of people say, I don't understand what it means. Is it good? Is it bad? So we've developed some tools to help people understand their lab report and to understand if they need to treat and what kind of treatment and things like that. So we'll cover that in this next section. Some of these slides I may go through very quickly because I want to spend some time on the actual testing portion, but feel free to stop me and ask questions. I'm stuck with the right button here. Not the right button.
I'll just,
Which one is it? This one?
but first let me do this.
Thank you. So just a little bit about the Public Health Laboratory. New Hampshire is a primacy state, and what that means is that the Department of Environmental Services here in New Hampshire has the responsibility and the authority to enforce the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. And because they have the authority to do that, one of the requirements is that they have to have what's called a principal laboratory. That laboratory needs to be capable and have the capacity to test water for all the primary contaminants under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and in case there's a drinking water emergency, an enforcement action, or some other event in which water systems have to be tested. And I speak primarily about public water systems. So the Public Health Laboratory in New Hampshire is that laboratory, and because we have that capability and capacity to support the Safe Drinking Water Act for the state, we offer those services to basically anybody who wants to test their water. We're a fee-for-service laboratory, so we deal with homeowners who have private wells. We do work with other state agencies who want to have drinking water or water tested. So we have a full-service laboratory for that purpose. Again, as I said earlier, people who have private wells may or may not know what to test their water for. That's correct. But how, what to test and when to test. So DES and Public Health came up with what we believe is the minimum things that people should test their private wells. Some of these, as Shelley mentioned earlier, and I know this slide's hard to read because the text is small, but some of them are what we would call acute health risks. So things like bacteria, nitrate, those are the two that come off the top of my head. I'm sorry?
Yeah.
That does. So those, if you are exposed to those, you'll get sick right away. Some of them are what we call have chronic health effects, things like arsenic, uranium, radon, lead. Those over a long period of time, if you're exposed, you will get sick. So we've come up with what we call our standard analysis, and that's going to be in some literature that you may be getting, and I'll talk about it later. But it's a list of contaminants or parameters that we believe are what people should be testing their wells for. And we believe that every 3 to 5 years, you should repeat this to see if the water quality is changing. Other than that, you might want to test more frequently if there's been a flood, at least for bacteria and nitrates in that event. Once the water's received, you've disinfected the well, you want to confirm that there's no bacteria, no nitrates. And anytime you feel like the water quality has changed, the taste, the odor, appearance, another indication that it's time to test your well. Where? That's the other question. How do I do it? Where do I go? Well, of course, the Public Health Lab, as I mentioned earlier, is here for you. Just a screenshot of our web page. So if you New Hampshire Public Health Laboratories, you'll get here a lot of information on this web page about water testing. We work very closely with the Department of Environmental Services on this topic. We reference a lot of their material, fact sheets, and there are links to that. You can order test kits online. We'll mail test kits to people. Also, as Shelley said, if you go to the DES web page and you go A to Z and hit P for private well testing, or W for well water testing, or there's many ways that you can get to a page that helps you learn about private well testing. Again, you can get lots of information there. If you don't, and I think the next slide, no, not that, sorry. On that page, there's a list of labs. Okay, on that page, you can get a list of accredited laboratories that also do private well testing. The one thing that we would say is if you choose to use another laboratory, just to make sure that they're accredited for doing that kind of testing. But there are many labs in the state that do the same thing that the Public Health Lab does.
And the prices vary, and they tend to be more expensive.
You didn't hear that from me?
No.
So then I want to spend the next few minutes going over, if you choose to have your water tested, basically the nuts and bolts about how to do it. I'll start first with the paperwork because we are a state agency, so there's lots of paperwork to fill out. Basically, there's some information that we need from you. Basically, when the sample was collected, date and time, who collected the sample, what type of sample you're presenting to us. So is it a well? The form is meant to be used for multiple types of samples. So some people, even though they're on a public water system, may choose to have their water tested with us. Sometimes we do surface water like lakes, beaches, things like that. If you have a pond in your neighborhood and you go swimming, you might want to test that. Or other. The source location, so this is where your well is located. The street address is what we're interested in, not necessarily the kitchen sink or something like that. So if the street address is the same as your mailing address over here, you can just check this box that says same as. And then we do want to know where to send your report. So some paperwork here to fill out. Then if you do know, we like to get some information about your water, so the type of well. That's so we can help you interpret your results. Whether or not your well has been disinfected within the last month. We would like to know whether you're treating your well, yes or no, and if you are, what kind of treatment you have, if you know that. And whether you're submitting a sample before or after treatment. So that, again, that information is to help us help you. And then below, there's the checklist of what you want your water tested for. Again, we're recommending that people do the standard analysis for $85, and then you can choose additional things like radon. Shelley mentioned radon, that's an additional $20. We'll talk a little bit about volatile organic chemicals. And then I'll note that if you choose the standard, you do not need to check any of these boxes that have the asterisks because they are included in the standard. So the standard includes arsenic, it includes fluoride, it includes bacteria, so you don't have to check those off. So that's a little bit about the paperwork. Let me see. I will talk about analyzing your well water for VOCs. We're offering, for those people who want to test their water for VOCs, that is going to be free of charge to you.
For the first 30 people who...
Okay, good, thank you.
30 samples, yeah.
This is part of, because of the MTBE Bureau that is housed in DES, and Shelley mentioned the litigation, lawsuits, and funds. They have funds available to assist people for testing their water for VOCs. So because it's separate from what you're doing as a homeowner and testing your water, there's another form to fill out. Similar to the one I just went over, but the additional thing is that you just authorizing the laboratory to share the VOC results with the state. And that's held in confidence unless there's some special circumstance. But we don't give out people's names and addresses in that sense. And so I will go over how to collect samples, I think, after... Yeah. So let me spend a few minutes on, if you're going to have your water tested, sort of the logistics of how to do that. So I'm going to talk about the standard plus radon if you choose to do that series of analyses. Okay, this is the kit that you would get. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bottles. What we do at the laboratory is for lead and copper, as Shelley mentioned, there's a stagnant and a flushed type of lead and copper. So the first thing we would ask you to do is let the water sit in the pipes for a minimum of 6 hours. Overnight is probably the best. So before you use the water in the morning, when you wake up, you're going to go to the kitchen sink and you're going to fill up this container that says first draw. That's going to allow us to measure the lead and copper that's being leached out of the pipes as it sits in there for a long period of time. And if your water's corrosive, then you'll have high levels of lead and copper depending on the plumbing and things like that. So that's the first thing you do, fill this one up. Then, if you have a screen or an aerator or some attachment to the faucet, we would ask you to remove that, and then with a little bit of dilute bleach, rinse the inside of the faucet just in case there's some bacterial growth in that, the threads, something like that. And then once you rinse it wipe it with some dilute bleach, flush the water for a few minutes to get rid of that chlorine, bleach. Plus we want to get the water that's has been sitting in your pipes and get the water that's in your well for the next test. So then you would take this container here. This is a sterile container. It's got a seal on it. You can break the seal. This is the container that we're going to do the bacteria analysis. And there's a line that says 100 mils. You want to fill it up above the line. It doesn't have to be to the very top, but it has to be above the line. So we'll do bacteria. Then you can fill up these two containers here. This one we're going to do the metals. That's part of the list. And this one we'll do nitrate, nitrite, chloride, fluoride. So that's the 4 containers for the standard analysis. The 5th container is for radon. Again, the easiest way to do this is to slow the flow of the water coming out of the faucet, not to a drip, but to just a gentle flow. You fill this one up to the top, and when you put the cap on it, there can't be an air bubble. Okay? Now, in the packet, there are directions and pictures. So the easiest way for me to describe this is that you fill it up so that there's a little crown of water. The water will crown over, and then when you put the cap on, a little bit will drip out, and you can flip it over and make sure there's no bubble. If there is an air bubble, you can just do it again. Sometimes people, fill the cap up with water and do that, and that kind of helps. But somehow, can't have an air bubble bigger than the size of a pea. Standard plus radon. If you choose to do the volatile organics test for free, you'll have 3 containers. One is already filled with water. So that's a control sample that we put to the kit. We fill this up at our laboratory with clean water, and everybody's been carrying it around. And so when we get it back, if we analyze this and there's some contamination, we know that something happened. So for instance, if you're doing this, don't stop at the gas station and fill up your car, because there's a chance that you might get some vapors getting contaminated. But you get 2 containers. Similar to the radon, you want to fill these 2 up to the tippity top with no air bubble. The only difference is these 2 have a preservative of hydrochloric acid, which is part of the requirements for doing the test, that it needs to be preserved. So you don't want to spill the acid on you as is. If you do, wash your hands, rinse your hands. But once you fill it up with water, the acid has been diluted that it shouldn't do anything to you. But if you do get some on, you just wash your hands with some water. So again, the directions that I just described are part of the kit that you will get. There are pictures, and if you have questions, if you get ready to collect the samples, you have questions, call the phone number on the paperwork. Somebody at the lab will walk you through it. And I will just, if there are any specific questions now, try and answer them.
Yes. We have low pH and we have copper pipes.
Yeah.
And so we have a water filtration system. So I was wondering if there was a way we could test to see if the water filtration system is effective.
So in that case, you would collect the sample after whatever your treatment, or I'm assuming you say filtration. I'm assuming that's treatment.
Yeah. So what is calcium carbonate, or yes?
So you do a pH adjustment.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you collect this sample after that treatment system, you'll know whether or not it's working.
Well, what we have, it's a complicated. What we have is we have one faucet, the sink, that is not filtered, and that's where we get our drinking water and so on, but we make sure the water is run and all
Yeah.
of that. So we might have to, so we could have two different
Yeah.
collections, right, to see
You
what
could
the
do it that way
situation
too. You could say, I'm going to do the standard analysis at the place where I drink the water, and then just do copper and lead from some other location to make sure your things work. So you can mix and match and do that. As long as you describe it in the paperwork where the sample is coming from, then we'll do that. The other thing I forgot to mention, on each one of these containers is a place for you to put your name and the date and time. So we need that information on the containers. It may not say name, but it might say some identification that we know it's from you,
Your address.
and the
please.
date and time that was collected. So again, after the meeting, if you have any questions about collection, I'll stay late too.
Is the volatile collection, is that a stagnant or?
That would be a flushed.
Is it flush?
Flush. And if possible, because the MTBE Bureau is using this information to do basically surveillance of the groundwater throughout the state, so they're using your well as a monitoring well for groundwater. If possible, the volatiles should be taken from a tap that's untreated, if you can get that. So they really don't want to know if it's going through a softener or some other treatment. They really want to know what's in the well for the VOCs. So if you can collect it from an untreated tap, that would be the best. If you can't, not the end of the world.
Because many homes have sediment filters on them, or other filters, and that would help remove volatiles just through the agitation of the water. So when you collect those, you want to, as Lou had mentioned, have a small, steady stream. You don't want to overfill the bottles very much at all, because you want the right amount of acidification of the water that you put into the container. So you want to get a little meniscus on top and put it on. So just take care and use raw water, as Lou mentioned.
Go ahead.
I assume it should be cold water versus hot.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
we would take from the cold water tap.
Great, and quickly, second one, after you get that stagnant, how long do you let the water run before you collect?
Just a couple of minutes. I mean, it depends on. I think the paperwork might say 5 minutes, but I think that's excessive. I know people worry about just flushing water down the drain. It really depends on the length of plumbing in your home. I think 1 to 2 minutes is more than enough for most homes. Okay, so let me go on. I think I got a few more things to do. Did I go to the right place?
Yeah.
Oh, so I like when I come out to communities, I like to just make a mention if the public health laboratory is already doing things in the community, I like to kind of highlight them. So for us, there are several public water systems in Northwood that use our laboratory for their water testing. We collaborate with the Volunteer Lake Association program and do sampling in Northwood Lake during the summer, and as well as the beach program in the state of New Hampshire. So we are analyzing samples for the Northwood Town Beach at Northwood Lake and the Lynn Grove Association Northwood Lake. So those samples come to us for testing.
Oh, before we continue,
Yeah.
I'd like to say something else. I know nobody here probably does that, but occasionally people just put a line out for their camps into the local lake. And that can be very dangerous because you can get cyanobacteria, you can get cryptosporidium, you can get E. coli. And just as a sense of how much E. coli you can get at beaches, the maximum E. coli content that's really allowed before a beach is closed in freshwater beaches is about 88, 70 in any one sample, 70 counts. Or, I'm sorry, 88 for E. coli, 88 counts per 100 milliliters of water. So that's a lot of E. coli to be drinking. You're not probably going to put your hose near a beach, but just to underscore that.
So the other thing we try and do when we come out to communities, if there's data available, to kind of share that in an aggregate. So this is data that comes from samples delivered to the public health laboratory during that time period from 2006 to 2018. So I'll highlight a couple of things. So if you look at the arsenic data, so over that time period, we've tested 150 samples. 74 of those have actually had arsenic detections. 27 of those have arsenic above the maximum contaminant level that Shelley talked about, was 0.01 milligrams per liter. So that's about 18%. Consistent with what the average is around the state or the probability. Now I'll mention that, I don't know if Shelley mentioned it, but the state is in the process of going through lowering arsenic MCL from 10 to maybe 5.
Yes.
So if that were the case, we would estimate that maybe this number 18 probably might go up to about 30% are going to be above 5. Just so you know. Radon, if we look at radon, we highlight 2 levels. This 2,000 to 10,000 picocuries per liter. About 46% of the samples fall into that range. At that range, the DES recommends that before you decide to do anything, you look at the radon in air, get that value, decide what the contribution is going to be from the water. If the sum total now is above the air standard, then you might consider treating the water.
The no longer active air standard of the EPA
The recommendation.
by 4 picocuries per liter.
That's in air.
Why did they discontinue?
No, that's still a standard, isn't it? The
Is
air.
for indoor air? Actually, I'm talking about water. I'm sorry.
The indoor air standard is still valid, 4 picocuries per liter. So if you test the air and you combine it with the contribution that's coming from the water, and you're going to be above 4, then you consider treating the water as well as the air. If your water is above 10,000, you should treat the water. That's the recommendation. Again, nobody can make anybody do anything with their private well. We can just recommend. Bacteria, about 17% over that time period have total coliform. About 3% have E. coli. Manganese, Shelley mentioned manganese. About 34% are above the secondary standard or the health standard of 0.05. About 25% have iron. Again, iron is just an aesthetic thing, so your water's going to be rusty, toilets are going to get stained. Lead. So again, we talk about stagnant lead and stagnant lead, and
Different
these
levels.
different levels. So depending on the level you have. There are options of what you should do. Again, we want to stress that there is no safe level of lead. You should have 0. So if you're in this 0.01 to 5 milligrams per liter, about 37%, this is the stagnant lead. 13% are within this 5 to 15 range, and then about 11% are above the lead standard that exists. So that's for the stagnant. So it means that, this means that the water could be corrosive in this area. And then once you go to the flushed lead, now the water's been flushed out of the pipes, still 14% have detectable amounts of lead in this 1 to 5 range. 4% are in this 5 to 15, and then none are above the standard. So, and there's some literature and some information I have later of if your lead is within those ranges, what you should do to mitigate the exposure to lead. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on treatment. I'll try and go. So again, another barrier public-private well testing is even though people tested their water as part of the survey, 1 in 4 people did not understand the results on their lab report. So we're trying to help. We're trying to help that. Basically, I want to talk about 2 types of treatment for homes. One is called point of use. It treats a single tap or one location where you're going to consume the water. This is an example of just a carbon filter that's attached to a faucet. In general, so it depends on what else is in your water, but in general, point of use treatment is appropriate if you have arsenic, uranium, fluoride, or taste. There's no need to treat the whole house if you have arsenic and you want to water the lawn or do your laundry. It's really the consumption that's the issue. And same thing for some of these other parameters. You just need to treat the water that you're going to drink and cook. So in this case, point of use may be appropriate. The other type is what we call whole house. Again, you're treating all the water that's coming into your home and that you're using. And so in general, if you have radon, iron, manganese, lead, copper, hardness, sulfide, odor, those type of parameters you would consider whole house treatment as opposed to point of use. So here's a little bit more about lead. Again, 0 is what you want. Flush your tap every morning before you use the water. We test the stagnant lead and copper to know what's there. If your lead level is above 5, especially if you have infants, you want to find an alternate source. And there's on our website, there's a really good fact sheet about lead in drinking water. Again, what to do if your lead results are within these 3 ranges.
What does alternate source mean?
Bottled water.
Bottled water.
And can one feel secure buying Poland spring water, or?
You could look up their analyses.
They are regulated. Not like public water systems are regulated. They're regulated as a food, under food protection. But most of those, yeah. So you can find out. The other thing that came about from our CDC grant, again, trying to help people understand their test results, is this Be Well Informed tool, which resides on the DES webpage. We have a link to it on the Public Health Lab webpage. If you Google Be Well Informed, you will get it. It's a tool that helps people interpret their lab results in terms of water quality standards. I'll show a couple of screenshots shortly, but basically it's a table that kind of looks like the general lab report that you would get from the lab, and you basically plug in the numbers for each of those parameters, and it helps you understand. Here's a screenshot, so you can, boxes for the parameters, the units. You're able to switch units if your lab uses a different unit. It defaults to what we believe is the industry standard for lab reporting. So you have some parameters here, bacteria, radiological parameters. So you plug all that stuff in, and you get something that looks like this. Green check mark, obviously you're good to go. Red X is bad. You've exceeded some standard, and it gives you some explanation about why the value's in red, and what you should know about that. Then it also sort of describes to you, based on everything that you've plugged into that table, what type of treatment options you have. It doesn't specify specific brands or names. It talks about technologies. So, for instance, in this example where you have arsenic, lead, and manganese, the first thing you would do is get a whole house oxidizing system or a whole house cation exchange water softener. That's going to take care of, I think, the manganese issue. Then you would follow that with some neutralizing system, because we know if you have lead, the water is corrosive. That's why you have lead. So you're going to neutralize the water and adjust the pH. And then the third step is you're going to add a point of use system of one of these 2 types to take care of the arsenic.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
How do we know a good company from a fly-by-night company?
buyer beware. I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that question. I don't know if there's.
My supervisor, who is the chemical engineer for the drinking water and groundwater barrel, just suggests that you get many quotations. If you don't understand something, you can give us a call.
Again, more information about interpreting the results, that you can print out a nice PDF file of this and have it, and you take this information to the treatment people that you're going to contract or work with and say, this is what I know, let's work together. Again, doesn't recommend any products, just technologies. And it considers multiple contaminants of varying concentrations. You get a nice report. You can get phone support from DES. Let's see. So yeah, you can find that link on our webpage. You want to talk about community engagement?
Sure.
Okay. So I think we got just a few more slides to go on.
This is an example of community engagement. I've used the community engagement materials to do some advertising and the PowerPoint presentation that you just saw. You're all welcome to use the materials to get a toolkit to give to any other groups that you would like to share this information with, whether in Northwood or not. You can remove the Northwood information. I put it in there and just take it out if it's not in Northwood. I'll just give you a little gander at what's in there besides this PowerPoint. They found, Dartmouth found that town testing events were effective at increasing testing if it was preceded by communications. I had some level of communications last year to do it, but then we had a snowstorm on the day of the presentation and on the day of collection, so we had 2 people for the
Can I
presentation.
just make
Sure.
a comment on this one? So back in 2012, before we had the CDC grant and we worked with communities like yourselves, the town of Tuftonboro, someone on the Conservation Commission from the town of Tuftonboro attended a presentation about arsenic at DES. And they reached out to us and said, how do we go about getting people in our town to test their water because we're concerned about arsenic? And what this slide actually demonstrates is that, and I could probably do a slide like this for every town in New Hampshire, is that on average throughout the year, we get dribs and drabs of people who test their water. And where you see those big spikes are days in the town of Tuftonboro where they promoted this sampling, and they basically said, everybody who wants to have their water tested, come by the town hall, pick up a kit, bring it back to the town, collect your sample on Sunday, bring it back to the town hall, and we'll bring it to Concord for you. Again, overcoming these barriers. So, the first time we did it, we had 115 participants the first year. 2013, we had 160 something. Then we dropped back down to 100, and then we dropped down to about 50. So you get a ton of people testing their water if you can coordinate one of these events, like Shelley's trying to do here, where we make it easy for you. We did get a spike. They have continued to do it in 2016, 2017. They took a break in 2018 because you get most of the people after a couple of years to test their water. And now you hope they get on that 3 to 5 year cycle and test again. So we'll probably do Tuftonboro again this summer. Thank you.
And we'll probably do Northwood again next year or in 2 years. And for those who are watching this and aren't here tonight, you can contact me, Shelley Frost. Look me up on Facebook. Look at the Northwood, New Hampshire community webpage and look for past events, and you'll see this event and contact me, and I will get you bottles. There is a toolkit. There's a table of contents. How do you start? It takes you through the whole process, gives you materials. Look at the appendices, interventions, and communication materials. What works in New Hampshire, as Lou just described, and planning worksheets. These are some examples of some of the materials. I'm going to go through this rather quickly. There's a checklist for you to go off, so to help you organize if you choose to do outreach. I can't overemphasize the importance of knowing the arsenic concentrations in your water, and here's another way to find out more. It provides users with a centralized web-based information resource for families, caregivers, and vulnerable populations. You can access it easily on your phones and tablets. Gives you more information about reducing your arsenic exposure, as does Be Well Informed, and resource links. By the way, Be Well Informed, created here in New Hampshire, is being considered as a model for nationwide communications. So kudos to all of those who are involved in that development. So important steps to remember: learn about private wells, understand water well contaminants, that's what we're trying to do here, test, find out how to treat. I suggest, again, getting a wide variety of quotations and asking questions and learn along the way. If you research D for drinking, W for water, G for groundwater, B for bureau, D, W, G, B, fact sheets, you'll learn a lot about treatment as well. You just search for treatment once you get to DWGB fact sheets, and you'll have a lot of information at your fingertips. We're done. Thank you for your time tonight. An hour and 5 minutes, roughly.
Sorry, I have one more question.
Please.
There going to be a collection of water
Yes.
next week?
Yes, next week, Tuesday at 5, starting at 5 p.m. at the voting location. So vote and bring your water, and please collect your water that day.
So let me just follow up. So I failed to, a couple of details I failed to talk about when I did my little show here. So there are a couple of requirements that we need to, I need to mention and you guys need to follow. So there are some time limits from when a sample is collected and when the analysis has to be completed. And the shortest one is the bacteria analysis. Must be completed within 30 hours. So as Shelley said, if you want to participate in this event, please collect your sample sometime on Tuesday.
Yes.
You can do it in the morning, 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Bring it to Shelley or wherever Shelley tells you to bring it on Tuesday afternoon, because she's going to bring it to the laboratory Wednesday morning. So if you collect the sample at 6 o'clock on Tuesday morning, we have to do the bacteria test by noon on Wednesday. Okay, so that's sort of the time constraint. There are some other short time holding times, like nitrate is 48 hours. But if we need to meet that bacteria holding time of 30 hours. So don't collect it on Sunday and bring it to her on Tuesday or Wednesday.
It'll already be expired.
It'll be expired and we won't be able to do that test. So collect it on Tuesday, deliver it to Shelley Tuesday after you vote, and then she'll be the courier. And then checks, yes, please make a check payable to the Treasurer State of New Hampshire for the amount. Again, this one is free if you choose to do that, and then we'll take care of it.
So it would be 85 and 20 if you want to do the standard plus the radon.
Correct. If you want to do standard plus radon, it's 85 plus 20.
And that can be in one check?
That can be in one check.
Okay.
And this is all contained in one little Ziploc bag.
I really want to thank Shelley as a community member. This was a lot of work. And
Well, let's stay as long as you want.
I have a surface well, and it hasn't been tested for bacteria for quite a long time.
A surface well is a spring?
A dug well.
A dug well, okay.
Right. But I don't use it to drink, but I do use it to shower and cook, well, sometimes cook, but I make sure it's boiled
Okay.
and stuff like that. There's a process that I saw out there, ultraviolet filtration.
Yes.
But I'm not sure how good that is, you know.
There are varying there are varying qualities of UV equipment. So NSF 61, if it's certified NSF 61, that means that it's good enough to use for drinking water disinfection. I work with the public water systems, and our policy is to not just allow when there's a bacteria problem with the public water supply, we don't just allow UV to be put on it to take care of it, because the equipment can break, the equipment can be not maintained sufficiently, so we really want to get to the root of the problem. And then if the public water system wants to put UV as an extra measure after that, if it's a restaurant or something, they'll want to make sure that their business is uninterrupted, then we allow that to happen.
Now-
But we really want, clean your dug well, shock chlorinated if you want.
Yeah, I don't like using chlorine with it. It just creates, from what I understand.
Byproduct. So you have to flush it after you do that. You
Yeah,
have to flush it all out
yeah, and that
after
would
you
be
do that.
an awful lot.
Do a pressure washer on the sides of the, well, yeah.
Now, if you have, instead of copper and lead pipes, if you have plastic piping, then you don't have to have copper and lead tested, I would think.
There's one exception because, and I wanted to mention this, I'm glad you asked, that if you have old fixtures, the fixtures also have lead in them. Up till 2014, they had a higher amount, now they have a much lower amount. I don't recall.
I don't know what the
8%, I think?
concentration
8%
is.
lead
But it's
for
not,
the guts
yeah.
of the
And the
fixtures.
solder
So
thing, you just
So it's
attach
not no lead, it's low lead. So you could still get some.
but you could replace your fixture and not worry about it, or you could do it just once to see what is coming.
Now, as far as arsenic is concerned, if you have a dug well, surface well, are you less likely to have a arsenic problem other than it coming through your, outgassing into your house? Is that the case, generally speaking?
That's a really good question. I've never heard that question before. I haven't looked at data from dug wells, because there aren't that many of them.
Versus artesian?
Versus artesian. The soils are made from the rocks, but they get flushed more because
Aerated.
water goes through it. And rocks only have the fractures except for the top.
And it's not allowed to aerate out if it's a dug well.
Well, arsenic can't aerate.
Oh.
So
Gas, really?
It's a metal, so it's not going to putting air in. The only way that arsenic would come out with introduction to air is if there's iron in the water that becomes iron oxides, and arsenic likes to stick to iron oxides.
So I think from my recollection of the data that we see come through our laboratory, if you have a dug well, you're less likely to have arsenic be an issue, but it's not like never. But it's less likely that you'll have
And radon, same kind of?
I think the same is true for radon. If you have a dug well, the risk of having radon is lower than if you had a drilled well.
Right, but I understand it can also come up through a foundation.
Well, because radon is a gas, it can percolate up through the ground and into your basement, and that's how you get radon gas in your home. And the same thing is true for radon in your water. But if you have a dug well, the water's not deep down in the
Right, so it has time to outgas, basically, outside.
It's less likely to be in contact with some of the more intense concentrations in the bedrock. So you're just less likely to get more contact between the radon yielding materials. Because they're not going to be in contact with less of that time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Oh, we have another question.
Question about sediment. I have a new well, and we followed the recommendations of the well driller as far as the flushing of the well after it was completed. It was hydrofractured as well to increase the yield. And we have just a simple sediment filter, $5 at the hardware store, sediment filter. That bedrock filings, if you will, the drillings, the actual drillings, takes a considerable amount of time, and we still have it present in the water, you know, several months, a few months. We've been there since December. And the water tested well. I mean, we've got a very favorable testing overall. We're very fortunate to have a good test. But can the sediment itself present health hazard as far as all that drilling?
It depends on what's in the sediment, if there's no uranium or.
Yeah, it just, especially with hydrofrac wells, it's the second well that I've had. It can take those fissures that get pressured out with the hydrofracking can really take a long time to clean up.
Yes, yes.
So I was just curious if, in that interim, you know, we try to keep flushing it out, and it does seem to take time. So I was just curious if there's any risk there in that process.
It depends on the formation, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay, that's fair.